and welcome back everyone. We now have a talk by the talented author Mr. Saksham Garg titled Making of an Author.
Saksham Garg is an editor at Penguin Random House, India, and a published author. For 7 years, he studied at Woodstock School, Missouri, from where he could see snow-capped Seven Hills in his book. He currently spends his time between New Delhi and Jaipur, and outside of work is often found on the football field or practicing. His book, Samsara, Enter the Valley of the Gods, was published in 2022 and swiftly became a well-loved novel. I now heartily welcome Mr. Saksham Garg on stage.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Christ. Wow, honestly, it means a lot to be invited to Christ University. I've had my own bit of interactions with the main campus, but I won't get into that. What I do want to generally ask before I get started is how many of you, by show of hands, are fans of Harry Potter? Okay, hands down, guys. Stranger Things? Alright. Percy Jackson? Okay. Pretty cool that a lot of you raised your hands for Percy Jackson. Is there anyone who hasn't seen Bahubali? Alright. Okay, final question. Raise your hand if you believe in God. Alright, hands down. So, thank you guys for that introduction. I do want to expand on that. It's been a while since that introduction that features on the first page of this novel was written. I am now an ex-editor at Penguin Random House, India, where I worked primarily on fiction books. Before Penguin Random House, India, I was studying I was doing my graduation in economics from Hindu College, Delhi University. And before that, I had spent 5 years working. Before that, I had been in school in Missouri. And during that time, I'd already started writing this book. So this book was something that I started working on exactly 10 years ago when I was 17 years old. And the reason why it took so long is because I wanted to try and bridge that gap. I wanted to try and aim to perhaps be compared to someone or something like Harry Potter, or, I was waiting for Rick Riordan to make his way from Greek to Norse to so many different mythologies to eventually Hindu mythology. But when he never did, I decided to take that up myself. And throughout this entire thing, there were many different events at my time in school and post that that has defined the different facets. This book it's not as frivolous as a bunch of students getting kidnapped and going to a magical valley and encountering gods, right? It does take on a larger idea, a bold idea on the take of, on the idea of God, bold take on the idea of God, which is why I asked you guys how many of you believe in God, right? So that is one aspect of the things that we'll be doing. The other is I'll be talking about how I was very, very fortunate to go from a course that has nothing to do with editorial. I wasn't studying English like a lot of you might be, and yet crack into this extremely elusive and coveted editorial team. Not just Penguin, it could be any publishing house or media house for that matter. But to be able to crack into that, what it takes and what I've gathered from my journey, notwithstanding how lucky or fortunate I may have been, and what I've learned, and how, if any of you, if at all, you have a doubt about what you want to do, perhaps in the professional space after English, I want to leave you with a thought at the end of this, that publishing is not only open and looking to take on more young editors, marketers, etc., but it's also the fun, glamorous, work-life balance, job that I think a lot of you might appreciate. So these are the different things we'll discuss. Before that, I do have a couple of quick quiz questions for you guys, because a lot of you raised your hands for Percy Jackson, so I'm assuming, okay, how many of you are familiar with Greek mythology? Okay, those of you who are raising your hands, keep them raised. Can anyone within them tell me who is the oldest of all the Olympians? Zeus is not second or third or fourth. Hestia, no. Okay, you know what? I'm keeping my ear open if I hear the right answer. So just shout them out. Who's the oldest Olympian? There are 12 Olympians in Greek mythology, right? Who's the oldest? Kronos is not an Olympian. He's the father of the Olympians. He's a Titan. Hades is the oldest of the big three. So he's the second oldest. Who's the oldest?
Demeter.
Zeus is younger than Hades. No, Poseidon is the third oldest. So the story goes that Kronos, the father of all the Olympians, ate his sons because it was prophesied that they would overthrow him, right? That's right. Who said that? Aphrodite. Yeah. That is correct. Aphrodite, often portrayed as the young, beautiful goddess of love and beauty, is the oldest. And I just find this very fascinating because she's the oldest because she needed to exist, love needed to exist for Uranus and Gaia to meet in the very, very beginning, before even the Titans. Okay, another question. This is about Hindu mythology. What is the oldest scripture in arguably the oldest religion in the world, Hinduism? That's right, Rigved. And which deity/god finds most mentions in these 300 and something hymns? No, not Lord Shiv. Yeah, Lord Indra, king of the gods. Someone who finds Indo-European cousins in Thor, in Zeus, right? As these elemental gods, right? They're very similar. Your Zeus is your Thor, is your Indra, lord of the sky, lord of thunder, king of the gods. The spear, metaphorical spear in that big three trident, that could either be Brahm, Vishnu, Mahesh, Indra, Agni, Som, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, you name it. So with that in mind, now that we've established the understanding of Indo-European equivalence, where I'm saying that Zeus is similar to Indra, is similar to Thor, what I want to ask is, can anyone tell me who is the Greek cousin of Saraswati? Athena. Okay. So now that we've understood this, Athena, goddess of wisdom, would be the Greek cousin of Saraswati, goddess of wisdom in Hindu mythology. Okay. Which Hindu god finds mentioned in Black Panther? Anyone? Yeah. Alright. Okay, now that we have the fun stuff out of the way, I'll dive into the meat and potatoes. Next slide, please. So these are the different things that I'm going to try and cover, and depending on what it is that you guys want me to focus on. So take a quick look. The green one is a bit of a non-negotiable. I'm hoping you guys will bear with me as I talk to you about my journey, and perhaps even check out the book after this. But the others, I am willing to divide my time into these different things. So, show of hands, how many of you feel that, we only get to sort of pick one, right? So how many of you feel that you would find most benefit in me talking about polishing your manuscript? Okay, so a few people have something, or at least want to know how they can work on their writing once they have something down. Overview of the publishing industry. Yeah, I was expecting a few for this. Different stages of editing. Okay. And finally, the do's and don'ts of writing a killer book proposal. Okay. So I haven't really benefited much from this poll, other than the fact that do's and don'ts of writing a killer book proposal is something I want to focus on. Okay, we'll start off with the non-negotiable, my journey on Samsara, right? Next slide, please. Oh yeah, the book cover. And next slide. Just before I start, lecturing you about my journey and why it's so inspiring, etc., I want to quickly, Ankur Warikoo style, tick off all the practical reasons, not that one should need one, there are to become an author today. A, it is a powerful branding tool. Even the Prime Minister adds this to his Wikipedia page, right? Even top movie stars do. And the Obamas, Bill Gates, the royal family, they've all come out with books that Penguin Random House has published in the last 12 months or so. Pays well, if you know what you're doing, definitely pays well. And for anyone who may already be published here or is looking to get published, more than happy to talk about this in detail. How you can make sure that you're only selling English print rights in the Indian subcontinent to your publishing house and not 25 different things that can be monetized, right? Third, reach a wider audience and connect at a deeper level. I would not have this opportunity today if it weren't for this book. I think that's pretty obvious. And fourth, adds credibility. That's up for debate, but these are the four things, right? That if any of you are pursuing becoming an author, poet, whatever, these are the benefits in addition to the obvious ones. Next slide, please. Okay, so like I said, this journey started 10 years ago when I was 17. I was in school, and there are three particular events that I attribute to the making of this book. The first event is I needed the world, and I used to study in Mussoorie, and while going up from Dehradun to Mussoorie, every 5 or 10 kilometers you either see somewhere on the side in a big blue board, it'll say Dev Bhumi or Land of the Gods. And as someone who went up to Mussoorie and lived there for 7 years of his life in the lap of the Himalayas, it wasn't surprising that at Lal Tibba, which is a famous scenic spot in Mussoorie, I saw extremely religiously significant mountains of Hindu mythology far away. So there were these 7 snowy mountains that you can see from Lal Tibba, Mussoorie. And these are Gangotri, Yamnotri, Bandar Poonch, Kala Nag, all of which find mention in the map that is in this book, right? It's on the 4th page, do check it out. So that's where I learned that if I'm going to have, who's going to be the focus of this story? Because there is already a ton of books both in fiction and non-fiction in the country. So what it is that I'm bringing to the table, and that is that I was going to bring Vedic mythology. And how I got to that particular aspect, right, is in school, when I was first introduced to Hinduism, I was introduced from a very anglicized perspective, which is something that has a ton of drawbacks. But what it did do is it introduced me to the Vedas, and more importantly to the Vedic gods, as opposed to the tantric gods that are worshipped today primarily. So your Indra, Agni, Som and other elemental gods, right, like Surya, Vayu, all of these came to the fore. And it made so much sense to me because I had already studied Greek mythology and then had the great opportunity of reading Percy Jackson and other books to further center my understanding of elemental gods, and then Norse mythology. And then when I eventually came to Vedic mythology, because I already knew the epics, which is your Mahabharata and your Ramayana, which are a lot more recent. But arguably somewhere around 2000 BC, when the Rig Veda was eventually penned down through oral tales, and it primarily talked about these elemental gods. So that was the first thing, right? Is I figured out I'm going to talk about these Vedic gods in my book. Second was when I'd finished reading Percy Jackson for like the nth time, and I turned to my best friend and I said, why can't we have this for India? And he said, you know what, why don't you go and write it? And I think he meant it a little frivolously, but I took it a little too hard. So I did start writing. And 10 years later, we do have a book that very Percy Jackson-like transports 10 modern-day Indians, few of them from New Delhi, others from around the country, with different mindsets and backgrounds, right? There are rich, there's a son of a rich Mumbai industrialist. The protagonist is an atheist being thrown into a valley where apparently he's coming face to face with the gods. There are scientists. There are people who are going to live the very purpose of being alive because they're going to meet their idols, the gods that they've grown up worshipping. So there's an entire motley crew of individuals, people who don't believe in God, people who are scientists, people who do not want to be in this valley, and all 10 of these guys from 2023, in the first chapter of this book, get kidnapped and are sent to a magical valley in the Himalayas that finds mention in a lot of cultures around the Himalayas. So this magical valley is part a figment of figment of my imagination, and primarily just me piecing together things that I just don't see why others haven't seen, right? So Far Cry 3 is a video game that mentions this world called Shambhala, right? Or there are so there's Lost Paradise that was published in 1933 by James Hilton, that is a very famous book, and it mentions how a British pilot during the time of the colonization, when it was coming to Calcutta, crashed somewhere in the Himalayas, and that was it. They never heard of the pilot who was coming from England to India until he showed up 10 years later in Calcutta and said, I have been in the magical valley of Vanyasa that I found. So this magical valley not only finds mention in the Vishnu Puranas as Gyan Gunj, it finds mention in Buddhism as Shambhala or Siddha Ashram, and of course as Shangri-La in a lot of modern day TV movies. And if you've seen Doctor Strange, you'll know that. This place is also the location that a lot of yogis, tapasvis around pious locations, I did encounter one or two in Pushkar, in Rishikesh, they're looking for it. Although they're looking for it a little more spiritually than physically, right? They're trying to get there. But that is the premise of the story and what happens when these guys get there. Because the reason I started writing this book, or the reason I guess I made sure I finished it, is because I think I've been beaten and bruised too often in a lot of recent protests, whether it's the Mandi House protests, etc. But I think the core thing that I'm trying to say through this book, and I'm not going to lie, I have to constantly watch my back, is that Hinduism is inveterately a peaceful and tolerant religion. And that is what the classical Hinduism scriptures scream. That is what they say. And I fear that we may have evolved to a slightly warped modern variant of it. Something that, although inside the country may seem like things are hunky-dory, but you have to understand that a religion is perceived by others by how that religion treats others around it. For example, for the longest time, Islam in the Middle East, for its intolerance towards others, was associated with terrorism. And you really have to be living under a rock to not know what the international media, irrespective of what you believe their agenda is saying. And it's important that a book like this, that takes a modern day protagonist from New Delhi and transports him, and through his lens, any reader can understand what Hinduism and the core tenets of Hinduism are truly about. Just the way that Rick Riordan did that with Greek mythology, I wanted to do that with the book and with the movie. So throughout this 10 years that took me to write this book, 9 rewrites from scratch, to make sure that it could one day be compared to Harry Potter, 4 of these 10 years as a fiction editor at Penguin Random House India, to make sure I knew what it is that I was doing, that it would one day really be in the hands of so many people. And I'm honored and really lucky to say that in the last 6 months of this book's launch, we've broken several records in terms of sales. It's the highest, it broke the world record, it broke the record at the World Book Fair, where I met a few of you that have been kind enough to even come and say hi. It turned into a national bestseller within a week of its launch, which is practically unheard of, especially for debut novels. It's being translated into 6 languages, including Manjul and Hindi, and they don't do fiction, and they're stellar in terms of their reach. We are in talks with PRH UK and US for a separate publication because, like I said, I only sold Indian subcontinent rights, and most importantly, we have said no to several Indian production houses because we are waiting and holding out for a Warner Brothers or HBO, because the end goal always was to make sure that the world outside India does not see Hinduism as something with an elephant-faced god and a blue-skinned god, but realizes what it truly is. And for that, you need a modern-day protagonist to take you. No one's going to want to read a Wikipedia page about Indra, Vayu, Agni, because, well, honestly, I tried doing that, and that's why I needed this sugar-coated, fun pill inside which would be the real material, that is the Vedic mythology. So this has been my journey, and it took me 10 years, and I don't plan on stopping. Really, the only pursuit I have in life is to die happily, but hopefully leaving behind a world that outlasts me. And there's a reason why it took so long to decide where every leaf and stone of this world was going. I feel non-world building, linear narrative fiction can be written a lot faster. So hopefully when you pick this up, you'll realize why there is so much word of mouth, why the movie's there or will be there, and why it's doing so well. So yeah, I mean, that's basically about me and the journey. And I do also want to talk about how a lot of you can directly jump, if you're interested, into the scope of being publishing industry professionals and the different roles. And instead of just glossing over, I do want to leave you guys with tangible things you can do, so that if any of you were keen, how would you apply, let's say, tomorrow or instantly, and things you can do. So before I dive into the publishing aspect and how it can apply to your professional journeys, we just quickly see the book cover reveal and the trailer of Samsara. Guys, can we have the cover reveal video, please? Yeah, that's the one. Thanks, guys. And now the video trailer. presentation, please. Next slide. Yeah. Next slide. So these are listicles based on my opinion alone. I think it's very important to note that. But honestly, I really don't think there'll be a lot of people that will disagree with too much of it. Once you're ready with a book, whether it's a collection of poetry, a novel, one of the first things you have to do is write a book proposal. And that is an art in itself, so we'll get into that later. That book proposal will be your way to a publishing house. There are two kinds of publishing house, or there are two different routes one can take, right? One is a traditional publisher, which is these, and the other is a self-publishing house. While the traditional publisher will not charge you, in fact, will end up paying you an advance for your book. It will market your book for you, it will distribute your book for you, it will edit your book for you, but it will only give you anywhere between 7 to 10% royalty. Whereas a self-publishing house will charge you for all of the things that I discussed earlier, but will give you a lot more returns in terms of royalty. So there are pros and cons to both, and therefore it's important to understand how they work. I'm going to particularly focus on traditional publishing because I feel that's where my forte lies as someone who's been a part of a traditional publishing house for a while. So these, if you want to quickly make a mental note or take a photo, is my understanding of currently what are the top 4 publishers or top few traditional publishers in the country that are acquiring across genres. Trade, these are not academic publishers, there are your trade publishing houses. So Penguin, Harper, Juggernaut, Hachette, Fingerprint, Rupa, Simon & Schuster, and a lot more. And reaching out to them is often a process that can feel very scary and you don't hear back from them. They often have submission pages where you can submit a proposal or your entire book depending on what stage you're at. And oftentimes people do not hear back. So the other way to get to a publisher is via an agent, someone who has the connects, right? And reaching out to an agent is similar, again, through a submissions page on their website, but the rate of response is obviously higher, right? Because you're choosing an agent that suits your material, your type of book, and they're just receiving a far fewer manuscripts a day. So the next slide, please. These are, again, in my opinion, the literary agencies currently. Clueless is a new entrant. They're amazing. Siyahi is a place that I insist for anyone here who wants to experiment with this industry should definitely try for an internship. Meeta Kapoor, Siyahi is the oldest literary agency in the country, and I interned there for 2 months. This is an unpaid internship for which one has to move to Jaipur, I believe, but great place to know whether you're right for the industry, and more importantly, whether the industry is right for you. And I think that's what Siyahi helps you understand. Also, Meeta Kapoor, the head of Siyahi, is the director of JCB, which is India's most prestigious literary award. It's our international booker, I think. But Jacaranda, Bangalore-based, and all of these others, the reason I wanted to bring these, and I wanted to list these, is because every day, I kid you not, I get a message saying, hey, where can I try for an internship, right? When I was there, up until 2 months ago at Penguin, used to spearhead the internship program in the editorial team as well. someone else is doing that. And I would often refer individuals to literary agencies. It's a great way for you to understand whether publishing is the place you want to go to, right? And before I go into the other aspects, I just want to take a quick 2-minute detour to give you guys a sneak peek into what my time at Penguin has been like, right? I spent 4 years at Penguin. I only joined Penguin because I'd already spent 6 years writing innumerable drafts of this novel, and I knew that there was no way that a Penguin Random House was going to look at an English undergraduate kid an economics undergraduate kid, right? I didn't even have a undergraduate degree in the language, let alone try and become a Penguin published author or in the hope of a national best-selling author. And I realized that the only way I could get Penguin Random House to perhaps look at me is if I were the person, if I was the commissioning editor who decided, or at least had a small role to play in deciding which local fiction books Penguin Random House was going to bring out in the year. And the last 4 years at Penguin, honestly, have been the best years of my life. It was a dream job. It was a job that I manifested and worked hard and chased and finally got. In my 4 years there at Cyber Hub, Gurgaon, I honestly have, I've found love, I've lost love, I've made enemies that I will never forgive. I've been part of a coveted editorial team that is legendary, really. For the first time in the history of the country, or the subcontinent, we've won not one but 2 international Booker awards, right? Tomb of Sand and Seven Moons of Mali Almeida. This team that I've been so lucky to be a part of, I've seen the entire company go upside down because the Prime Minister wants his book published in a month as opposed to 6. I've seen autobiographies ghostwritten. Authors have lost their hands for the books that they've written with us. Salman Khurshid had his house burnt down. Salman Rushdie, of course, everyone knows with the stabbing, also, another author that Penguin Random House India claims very, very proudly. And more importantly, I think at my time there, I've not only lived my dream, I've had the chance to work on, edit, scold some of my heroes, right? Some of the best fantasy authors that were my authors. And of course, throughout it all, I got to live my dream. I actually became a Penguin author, a national best-selling author that will hopefully get his word out there through the form of a movie. The audiobook for this book in itself is something that I'm so proud of because two of the best voice artists have made it. It's one of the most trending books, audiobooks on Audible right now. It's got sound design, it's got background noise. If there is a sad bit, I promise, although I play the violin, but there is a cellist playing while Aman is talking, the main character. Or if there is a war, there is the clamor and din of swords, etc. Just trying to give you a glimpse of this world in publishing, because for those of you who may have at all any apprehensions about where can I proceed from a professional, corporate perspective after, let's say, an English undergraduation or post-graduation or PhD or you name it, right? Publishing is not only fun, balanced in terms of work and life generally, it's glamorous, you get to interact with authors, you're surrounded by young, bright Delhi University undergraduates, and we'll talk about these roles, we'll talk about all of how you can try and approach these things. So, next slide please. These are the 2 roles that, in my opinion, are most relevant to those here today. If any of you are at all considering trying to get into the publishing industry, editorial is something that requires excellent communication skills, editing skills, knowledge of the industry, and how you can prepare for it. Or at least when I was taking on editorial interns, I asked them these 3 things, or I tested for these 3 things, right? First, something that you can do is read actively. When I say read actively, I mean you're not just reading for entertainment, but you're actively looking at diction, you're looking at syntax, you're seeing how certain things are executed. You're making note of things you like, that you want to take inspiration from. Oftentimes, my novels or the books that I am reading will have copious annotations in their margins, right? And it helps you come back having these notes. Because I promise you, if there is one habit I can point to, if I were asked what it is that's allowed me to be here right now to talk to you on stage, and that would be compulsive note taking. Note taking when I get a brilliant idea right before I'm about to fall asleep and I'm telling myself I'll remember it tomorrow, but I really won't. Note taking then, as well as note taking while I'm reading a book and I notice a sentence that I particularly like. So just taking notes of all ideas, right? That's what active reading does. Thanks. Track changes, right? Track changes seems fairly simple. It is a simple Microsoft Word feature that allows you to basically make changes to a text that the other person can see. And it seems pretty straightforward, and it is. But oftentimes when interns or new entrants or new users of track changes, what they end up doing is they end up inserting more punctuation issues because of how it is. So just taking out that 1 hour before you apply for a publishing house or a literary agency for an internship or a job to understand how this works on your Microsoft Word will really go a long way. And I think more than just doing that, telling said professional who you're applying to, if you're reaching out to an editor or an HR, and you tell them, hey, I know how to use track changes, I think just the very mention of it would be pretty impressive to them, and they would take a mental note. That is what I feel. And thirdly, just knowing about the Indian publishing landscape. We've got great authors here. Just generally, just knowing about who is writing in what space, what their names are, what books are doing well. I joined Penguin, I didn't know any of this. So it's not an absolute must, but I am trying to equip you with the few things that I think will truly catch an HR's eye or an editor's eye when trying to find someone from within a batch of, let's say, talented young English graduates, right? The other new role that's come up in publishing, I'm assuming this entire publishing thing is very new to you guys all, but in case it isn't, this is a new role that's also come up. It's filled with young, like I said, editors. Oftentimes, at least at Penguin, most of the editors are individuals that have not only done their bachelor's and master's in English publishing courses in the UK and have made their way up from a Ruba to a Harper to eventually to this glass ceiling here at Penguin. But, and by virtue of that, of course, the average age of, I think, editorial can be slightly higher by virtue of this experience, but publicity and marketing has something that even editorial doesn't have. Not only does it pay the same, not only do you have that straight, direct interaction with the top authors, because you're their publicist as well, not only does the editor have that, what it does have is the ability to get out of the industry in case it doesn't suit you. Because there's enough demand for publicists and marketers outside of publishing, but I think an editor may find themselves a little restricted to, let's say, media or other publishing houses without taking a pay cut and moving to any other industry. So these are the two different things, and for publicity marketing, of course, these are pretty straightforward skills. So if you want to take a quick look at that. Guys, this is all also to say that if any of you have any further questions about these things, please feel free to ask after the session or approach me directly. Because if even one within you says, hey, I really want to try and become a publicist in a publishing house or a literary agency, and in addition to these, if there's anything else I can do, I'll be more than happy to try and think and see if I can connect you. Next slide, please. Right, so a lot of you raised your hands for polishing your manuscript, etc. Next slide. So we'll quickly talk about, next slide, skip this. Right, few tips on writing that have worked for me. I think each author has his or her own way, but for me, I feel like motivation is ephemeral, it comes and goes, and if you rely upon it, it can become your biggest weakness as well in terms of finishing long form fiction or even getting a poetry book finished. So establishing a routine is important. I was just talking to someone else who said, please do talk about these things in detail. So the second point, don't aim for perfection and tell yourself the story. Like I said, innumerable drafts, and when I say drafts, I don't mean drafts of editing. That I did, of course, right? And I requested the best of the editors at Penguin or otherwise to help out. But my first draft of this book was me telling myself the story, really. It's like driving in the middle of the night where you can only see, 10 meters ahead. You just got to trust it and keep going on. And I told myself the story. I didn't know where it was going. I had no idea. And I told it, and the second draft and the third draft was rewriting it in a way where it seemed like I knew what I was doing all along. And this is a very famous advice. I forget, I think it's Anne Lamont's Writing by Writing, but telling yourself the story in the first draft is one of the core tenets in in a particular form of writers when they talk about writing about writing. So, for those of you who may be still trying to figure out that long character arc and that long plot structure and having detailed notes before you decide to write that first page of a book, and in case that's not working for you, try this approach. Just, fingers to keyboard, start writing, even if you don't know, even if you only know as far as the next few sentences, start writing and keep going, and you'll have plenty of drafts to come back and fix it and pretend as if you knew what you were doing all along, and the twists that come later, and to sprinkle enough hints in the beginning, etc. Just side note, there are 5 twists at the end of Samsara. I know a few of you are currently in the middle. If any of you do end up reading it, and you genuinely catch one of these twists before they surprise you, please do reach out and let me know, because I want to know how I can make these twists even better hidden and better executed in my upcoming books. I would really appreciate that feedback. But yeah, third advice, find your authentic author voice. I don't want to dive too much into this particular aspect. It is something that publishers and agencies are looking for, but finding an authentic author voice will only come through writing, just generally writing. And I think more than trying to write originally, which is I think usually the mindset behind trying to find an authentic author voice, I think the idea is to just write with concentration and true to your heart. And it'll slowly mold itself into an original author voice. Third, show, don't tell. For any aspiring fictioneers, right? Any aspiring fiction writers, novelists, this is the biggest hack that I know. This book called The Emotion Thesaurus. It's a writer's guide to character expression. Fiction is about showing and not telling. So instead of saying this boy was talking on stage and he seemed awfully nervous while he talked on stage, instead of saying that, instead of telling that, you show it. You show the stammer in his voice. You say his voice was stammering. You show the sweaty palms. You show the crease on his forehead that always forms when he is a bit nervous, right? Or how I think Khalid Hosseini does it in A Thousand Splendid Suns. In the last page or so, he talks about how Miriam, the protagonist, the character, he shows how she embodied the hut that she was in by not saying that she embodied the hut, but by instead saying she could tell the time of the day upon the angle the sunlight fell into a hut, almost as if she'd spent so much time in that hut. That's another way of showing her not telling. And there is an entire list of how to execute these in the Emotion Thesaurus. So you can Google it. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on where you lie, it's available for free online. So you just type Emotion Thesaurus and check it out. It starts from A and it shows you how to execute anger, how to execute B all the way to D, all the way to Z. Penultimate point that I have to make is read aloud the dialogue. In fact, read your entire manuscript aloud. But if you have a dearth of time, definitely read aloud the dialogue. And finally, economy of words. If you're editing your book, if you're editing something you've written, I don't care if your Instagram caption, reel something, right? Or it's somewhere in the middle of a 2 lakh page tome, right? Seminal tome that you're writing. In my opinion, one of the best things you can do to your work is see if you can rewrite the exact same thing, whether it's a sentence, paragraph, or a larger piece of format, in fewer words without any loss of meaning or emotion, right? If you can, more often than not, it's the right decision to make. And I think in these multiple rewrites that I keep on boasting about here up on stage that I've done for this book, right? Oftentimes I didn't have many changes to make. I was just rewriting the exact same thing except for minor changes. The one thing that allowed me to keep going is because every time I did a minor rewrite, I would shed 2-3 words per sentence. What used to be an original 2 lakh draft, first draft, is now a 70,000 word novel, which has more than that 2 lakh words had. Um, so yeah, in my opinion, economy of words as a thumb rule for editing anything that you write works. Next slide, please. I did say I would get to this. Guys, second last slide, right? Pay attention, I'm going to wrap this up really quickly, but killer book proposal. This pro tip, I really mean it. It's probably the cornerstone of my little session here today. If there's one thing that you can take away from this session and be like, you know what, I know something that very few aspiring authors know in the country, and that actually works, it's this pro tip right here. So a book proposal is basically a little document that you create for your agent who will help you reach a publisher, or directly your publisher that you create for your publisher, that basically summarizes or gives the publisher an understanding of what it is that you're proposing for them to buy, right? So when I wrote this book, I wrote a little blurb which goes on the back of the book. I wrote a synopsis, which is something that no reader ever sees, but it's for the editor, which is भाई क्या हो रहा है A to Z तक, what's happening in the plot, right? And a lot of other things like my bio, who am I, etc., etc. And that is what every single Google search will yield when you search how to write a killer book proposal. The one thing that agents and publishers are all desperately looking for is this little document that should be attached that says marketing plan, irrespective of what's inside it. If it's attached, it just goes a long way, because you're showing to the publisher that you understand that your job does not end when you send your book in, that it only truly begins, right? And that you've got to go out and promote it, and therefore that you put time to think about it. The other 4 things are what Google or generally the narrative that is pushed will tell you. These are the things you need, right? But honestly, my time as an intern at Siahi in Jaipur and the 4 years in Penguin, I had the opportunity to look at some of the best book proposals, a ton of book proposals, and what I did, much like everything else that I was doing in life, was see it from the lens of how will it help me get Samsara published and into the biggest thing ever. And that meant that every time I looked at a proposal, I would try and make note of anything that stuck out or that was stellar. And by the end of it, when I wrote the book proposal for Samsara, and it was pitched at Penguin anonymously, because as an employee, that was not supposed to be, it was actually called an editor's proposal. So if any of you would like access to the proposal, please, I think we'll pass around a sheet at the end of this workshop. If any of you want me to send you the proposal that I had written for Samsara, that was called an editor's proposal, please do write down your emails, and I will circulate the sheet after, and I'll be more than happy to send it to you so you have some sort of sample to go on from, when you're writing your own book proposal. And finally, the last slide, please. I want to take you quickly through the process that turns a Microsoft Word document in your computer into a glistering paperback at W.H. Smith Terminal 3, New Delhi Airport, which is the highest turnover of books in the country in terms of any physical store there is currently. And I'm very, very proud that right now, in the Indian writing chart, Samsara is number 3 after Devakarni and Amish's book in that chart. And I recently got Mahesh ji, who's the head of the store there. I'm going to be putting out a LinkedIn and an Instagram post about it tomorrow. Sorry for that detour, but it really is. W.H. Smith T3 is one of the primary places where books are moved. Kemp's Corner, Crossword, Mumbai, or they've done Sapna bookstores, Church Street in Bangalore. There's so many different places, right? But once you've written a book, like I told you, you reach out to an agent, and an agent then takes it to an editor at a publishing house. once it reaches an editor, the editor has to get it approved through two rounds of internal approvals, where first the editors take a look at it, and then the entire company sort of makes a decision to make sure there's no nepotism, that the book truly deserves to be published, etc. And then the commissioning editor who's acquired your book will work with you and the designer to get your cover ready. They will structurally edit your book, which isn't grammar, which isn't your line editing. Structural slash developmental editing is looking at the, it's about looking at the book from like a bird's eye view. It's about deciding what loopholes there are in reading them out, what character isn't fleshed out enough, changing chapters, very large, basically the ideation, the product as a whole, the packaging. By packaging I mean cover, blurb, what the title is, what the subtitle is, things that the reader is eventually going to see in terms of making a decision to buy. Once all of this happens, right, it's a 6-month process between the time your book goes into a publishing house and it goes into print, and in this 6-month process, 8 sets of eyes, at least for Penguin Random House India, 8 unique sets of eyes will go through your book, from a commissioning individual who commissioned your book and developmentally editing it, to someone who works on it from a primary editing perspective, someone who copy edits it, someone who then proofreads it, someone who then does the QCs. Then there's usually an intern who does a quick free read to read them out before we send it to print. And there are several people who do this. So 8 sets of eyes make sure, other than you of course, 8 sets of different editors will look at your book, and then when it eventually goes to print, it takes a month, and another month for it to be distributed throughout the country. So that's how you turn, or that's how a publishing house turns a Word document into paperback. Really hope this was helpful, guys. I think this is it. Next slide. Yeah, so this is it. Thank you so much. I really hope this was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions. Any questions? Yes. Sorry, so how does one explore the commissioning aspect?
Yeah, I mean, apart from editing, when you talk about this whole publishing field, right, there are so many job roles there, and everything is very exciting. I mean, when you look at the basic skills needed for any of those roles, right, the basic structure or the basic skills remain the same, right, but then finding your niche, finding your way out, and then exploring and somehow working towards it. I mean, when you sit and when I say that, oh my god, I'm interested in something like this, but then I will not for sure say that, oh my god, this is it, what I want. It's a journey and exploration. It's certain steps, it's like trials and errors. What is it? I'm not asking for a guide, but like something to start with.
No, so you have to understand that it's been, what, 4 or 5 years since I was an undergraduate Delhi University student. So in the little that I understand in these 4 years, how I did it is, I initially went in as a freelance transcriber, right? And when I joined the Penguin team, I joined as a proofreader, which is reading out your punctuation and your spelling and all of that stuff. Eventually, I worked as a copy editor on Dr. Shashi Tharoor's Re-Jacket, which is why he was kind enough to even later, read the book and see if he could endorse it. But at least what I can say for Penguin is, when when I talk about editing, I think you might have misunderstood. I don't necessarily mean working with text. Because you mentioned commissioning, right? That is actually the role I was talking about. When I said read Indian authors or know about the publishing landscape, right? I mean in terms of a commissioning space. For example, a Penguin editor did go out to Alia Bhatt and get her to write a book during the pandemic. Shaheen Bhatt. And then request her sister to go on, let's say, Kapil Sharma show and cry, so that the book could sell, But these are commission, or if I particularly want a book on so for example, I wanted Sunil Chetri to write an autobiography, and I did reach out to him. But his team insisted that that an autobiography would be 2 years down the line. So that idea, that role of a commissioning editor, is actually these things that I'm talking about. So when you apply for the editorial team, not only will you be restricted to a particular role, like I said, there are 8 levels of editing: commissioning, structural / developmental, primary, copy editing, slightly more line editing, which is a little more meticulous, and then proofreading, free reading, QCs. You can experiment and find what suits you once you get in. I think the only real decision one has to make when, how do I get started, which is what you asked, is whether or not you want to try this industry. I've seen people jump from marketing to editorial. And in terms of actual meat and potatoes, like what would you do right now if, after sitting down, if you wanted to get started? Like I said, if you took a photo of all of those literary agencies, find them on LinkedIn, find the individuals in these literary agencies, create a nice little fun message that sounds confident yet humble, and copy paste and send it to all of them. And start doing that for publishing houses. And I guarantee you that that's at least how I made it. And I have a ton of individuals that continue to do it. LinkedIn is a great way to reach out to these directly. Another little thing that I do is so I think you guys are at Christ University dot whatever, right? So I take the domain and I put that in double quotations on Google. So when you put things in double quotations on Google, it fetches the things and it fetches the exact same things, right? But what that allowed me to do was find all the different email IDs of Penguin Random House that wasn't available in public domain, but had at some point been on the internet. And I got access to so many different editors and publishers that I wouldn't get access unless HR approved. So that you can practically do that for any organization if you know their domain. But I think that's a little outdated. Just LinkedIn is probably the best way in terms of how to get started. You're welcome. Yes.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask how, you mentioned Shaheen Bhatt's book and the publicity tactics which were taken by them to, endorse the book. How much do you think originality and authenticity is important for, getting the book in front of others, and how do you think authenticity affects how the book, plays out later? Like, you can sell the book by having tactics. But how do you think authenticity affects it later? And do you think it's important for, the future of the book, not just selling the book at the particular time?
No, I don't think anyone publishing is in two minds about how this works, and how they see it is that shameless tactics, like the one that I used as an example earlier, is what is needed to get the book to have that initial role of sales. And that authenticity, that honesty, writing about what people are most afraid to write, like Naria Waheed says herself, that I think is something that all writers need to learn to do. That authenticity is what makes sure that that book is recommended further. So you could use all the tactics in the world and not be able to create any momentum. Or you could do one simple tactic or any sort of marketing strategy to get that initial sales going. And if, like you said, your book has these core important tenets to writing a book today. One question that I ask myself every single day in these 10 years is, why does this book need to exist? If you have an answer to that in your work, if there is authenticity, if there is a unique voice, if there is heart and soul and honesty, then it will have that word of mouth. No amount of money or tactics can get you that. And I think that truly is the reason why Samsara is doing so well, because truly people are resonating with these 5 twists at the end, these roller coaster of emotion ride, emotional roller coaster ride. So yeah, I mean, I know there are more questions and I'm more than happy to answer them. I just want to state that there is, guys, again, please check out the book. There is more about the movies, the series, the Discord server, etc. on the last page. The fourth page has the map, and the first page has my socials. So if you guys have any questions, if not necessarily right now, later, if 6 months down the line you guys are like, okay, you know what, this guy talked about trying to get into one of these literary agencies, and I'm trying and I'm not really getting any sort of response. Saksham Garg 94 on every single social media platform. That's where I'm at. You can reach out. Yeah.
Greetings, sir. I'm Tanisha from. I'm pursuing English major. So I wanted to ask. I'm very curious to know about your journey. So what inspired you to move into literature and writing, like writing such an amazing book like Samsara?
Thank you. No, I've always been reading. I've been trying to find, even as a child, little typo errors in Penguin published book, because those are the books I thought, I used to have the toughest time to find a mistake in. I think Penguin did a relatively better job. But after reading Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, I was desperate for that Hogwarts letter, to be honest. So I decided to write a book that I wanted to read, and I decided to give that Hogwarts letter to an Indian, right? I mean, this is that, and I'm really happy that both the Harry Potter series and the new Percy Jackson series will be coming out. And hopefully by that time we'll also have the Samsara series. But what truly inspired me to get into that is my love for similar books. And as someone who grew up reading, it wasn't too ludicrous for me to try and see this is what my dream is. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
You mentioned initially that you attempted to encapsulate a few tenets of Hindu philosophy in the text, in the book that you've written from your perspective. So I won't really ask what are those tenets, but how have you translated them into text, primarily focusing on the Vedas and not focusing on the Tantras?
Yeah, no.
If I might add,
Yeah.
how have you not included Tantra and its various sadhana practices into the text that you have writing? Why only the Vedic focus?
Why tantric at all? That's my issue, right? If the Vedas are so important, if they're the original scriptures in Hinduism, arguably the oldest religion in the world, why is it that most people don't know more than 5 Vedic gods, right? And the core tenets in the Vedas, there's so many, right? I'm focusing chiefly on the Rig Veda, and Samsara is one of the core tenets, right? Ahimsa, I think a lot of people associate Ahimsa with Gandhiji. It far predates him. It's animals equals humans equals trees. It's the confluence of all living beings and equal weightage in terms of value of life. Samsara is actually a negative context word. It is the materialistic cycle that bounds you through the 7 lives that you take on earth before you go back to the large ocean of souls that is called Brahmand, according to the Rig Veda, and a few Buddhist texts also. So these different tenets are what I discuss. Another thing that I try and show, so like I said, when compared to Harry Potter, I am saying that I was inspired by Percy Jackson. Well, I obviously cannot have wands, right? There are no wands, there's no Avada Kedavra, Expelliarmus, or anything of the sort. So the magic system in the book finds inspiration from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali's, where the 7th limb in these elusive last 2 limbs in this 8th limb system is called Pratyahara, which says the withdrawal of the senses. And how I have perceived it is a meditation art, yogic meditation art, so ancient and cool that it allows your soul to break free from your body and attach itself to any living being. But going back to your core tenets, right? Why not the itihasas? Why not the tantric gods? Because I think there's enough discourse around that. I think the idea is for me to try and bring to the fore these relatively little known stories, and I'll be honest, it's not like I've read the Rig Veda. I don't need to. They have individuals, Sukumari Bhattacharya ji, PhD scholar on Indologists like Venti Donegal, that have dedicated their entire lives to it. And I feel like most of the country is still oblivious to these amazing, fun stories that find so much to take, that offer so much for practical today learning. And when I started to try and understand them, it was too difficult. So I took the slightly more known aspects of classical Hinduism. For example, the Samudra Manthan, I'm sure you've heard of in the Vishnu Puranas. That's one of the Puranas that is finds mentioned. Out of the Samudra Manthan, when the Devas and Asuras came together, came many things. Amrit, etc., right? One of the things that is overlooked yet again is the Kalpvrish, the wish-fulfilling tree, that when Indra brought back to Mount Meru or Amravati, caused a large war, a war that lasted yokes between the Devas and the Asuras. And according to the Vishnu Puranas, where that story ends, to end the war, what Indra Dev did, he took the Kalpvrish, the Kalpatru, and he hid it somewhere in the Himalayas. And that's where I've sort of taken the inspiration to start the story from there. So what I've tried to do is, other than not just telling you about the fun little story between Indra and Vritra in the Rig Veda that is mentioned, I also try and put forward an isolated ecosystem in the form of this magical world, where if true environmentalism was followed through this weird warped variant of Swadeshi movement, if you want to call it, right? Uh, how different would it be if we treated everything around us in confluence, and how would we have speciated to be able to execute these magical things like Pratyahara that I talked about from the book. So it's not just about the mythology, it's about how that mythology can be applied to today's life, and if it were applied to today's life, how much better your today's day life would be.
Sorry, one small question. But according to the Shastras, the Tantras, Shiv says that in Kali Yuga, the Tantra practices, the sadhana practices, which forms the basic of connecting to the reality, they are much more effective in Kali Yuga. Then how is your statement standing? How can one really bring mythology into a day-to-day life without taking sadhana into context?
I'll be honest, the aspect of mythology you're talking about, I don't know, and I won't claim to know. There are 300 versions of the Ramayanas alone, and I haven't even touched the Itihasas, right? All I'm trying to do through this book is try and acquaint the Indians today, or Hindus today, including myself, because that was the entire point of this, to the main gods and the large narrative, linear narrative that is in the Rig Veda. I think in the sequels, I'll definitely have to dive a lot more into different iterations. And I promise you, I've attended enough launches, lectures of not just Samsara, but of all the mythology books that I've edited and worked on. And rarely can you go through a session without someone putting across a side narrative. And you know what it eventually boils down to? It just being a different variation of this extremely diverse itihasa or mythology, right? So I present to you Sukumari Bhattacharyaji's understanding of the Rig Veda and its gods. That's it.
Thank you so much.
Do we have any more questions?
We'll take one more, and like I said, guys, you can reach out to me personally right after this, after Bijit's session, or Saksham Garg 94 on any social media handle if you have any questions.
Good afternoon, my name is Kanchinan and I'm currently doing my undergraduation of first year in the triple majors, and English is one of my major core here, and my question is divided into two parts. First, do you believe in gods, and if you do, why does
I'm an atheist.
Okay. And then secondly, my second part was when you spoke about marketing strategies also, when you're launching the book, you said that there it is when it begins.
Sorry.
When we give it a publishing house, the book when we publish to a house.
Right.
Okay, so we add a marketing proposal to
Correct,
it.
marketing plan. Yeah.
So what was your marketing plan when you have started with the psychological strategies which you have put up to show all the video and
Yeah. These were all part of the marketing strategy and the plan. And if you want that entire 30-point marketing plan, like I said, we'll pass out a page. So I'll be happy to share the entire book proposal. It's 2-3 paragraphs in an email with all the attachments such as marketing plan, synopsis, and blurb to give you an understanding of how each of these should be executed. At least you'll have one example.
Could you brief what you?
Sorry, could I?
Could you brief what was your marketing?
What marketing plan includes?
Yeah, no. What would your marketing strategies?
What was my marketing strategy for this? I think primarily, other than a few technical things such as bloggers, so the Bookstagram community where I think Penguin sent out 15 copies to 15 top bloggers that read the book and posted about it. And that created a ripple effect throughout the blogging community. Standing at the Penguin stall at the World Book Fair, right? That is a marketing strategy. Very few authors do that. But I was there talking to individuals. I think if I were to pinpoint one particular aspect that not only has worked, but also has differentiated my marketing campaign than all the other authors that I've had a chance to see or work with, is that I've just tried to directly interact with my audience. And I think that comes because of two things. Firstly, by virtue of my age and my ability to just spend all day traveling. And I think more importantly, the fact that I've had the great intersectionality of an understanding of an editor and an author. So as an editor, it was often my job as a commissioning editor to spearhead the marketing campaign with the publicist. So I already knew how different books are marketed. I already knew the different things that I'd done. So when I came to Samsara, I did request a lot of these people that had worked on the other books that I'd edited to help out with. So I always got, I guess, I'm not gonna lie, but slight preferential treatment because they already knew me. But that was the entire point, right? I did dedicate. I think the investment to get that was I dedicated 4 years of the prime of my life to a publishing house to try and understand how I could better write, package, publish, and market Samsara. That was the sole reason why I joined Penguin as well.
And you said you have done economics majors in...
Sorry?
Economic majors you have done.
Yeah.
That. So do you think that has helped you anywhere in this?
Not this, but I think with other plans later in life that I have in mind, the economics major will also help out. But not for this. I don't think economics has really helped. I would really have to nitpick and stretch my imagination to find a reason how it's helped Samsara.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Hello, sir. So I really like the poster, I really like the cover art of your book.
Thank you.
So I would like to know, is there any story, is there any any creativity of yours which also contributed?
Yeah. So fun stuff, right? And actually, now that you mentioned it, can we go back to one of the slides that had the cover, please? Keep going. Keep going. Yeah. So above the elephant, which is Eravat, the king of all the elephants.
Thank you so much, Mr. Saksham Garg, for that extremely insightful talk.